Hi, I'm Doyle Bishop with Tulsa Heaters Midstream. Today I want to talk to you about something near and dear to my heart, amine reboiling. So most of you guys know what an amine plant is and what it's used for, but just briefly touch on. So you get the natural gas out of the ground. It's got some things in it that we don't want. It's got CO2 in it and some sulfur H2S in it. And one of the great ways, or the typical way of getting that out, is with an amine solvent. And in that process, you end up with rich amine that's full of the things that you want to get out of the natural gas, and the way to get it out and make that amine solvent lean again is to reboil it. Sounds pretty easy. Hey, how hard can it be to boil something? But let's break it down a little bit more and talk about some of the pitfalls, some of the good ways to do it, some of the bad ways to do it. So let's start with temperatures. So typical boiling temperature, it's a mixture of amine and water, and it's called an amine solvent. And a typical outlet temperature out of your reboiler is in the range of 250 degrees F. We would call that the bulk temperature. Well, any heating that takes place with these various pieces of equipment involve hot metal. And so let's just think about that for a second. Let's just draw a cross section of a pipe or a fire tube and what these temperature terms might mean. So if I apply heat to one side of that tube, I'm going to call it Q. Obviously heating that tube, whether it's a fire tube or if it's a tube full of amine solvent, I'm applying heat to that. So on this back side is where the amine all is. So the amine solvent is all in here. So if we look at that, this region, let's draw just a real tight dotted line along that piece of metal. This is metal. This area between this dotted line and the metal is called the film, okay? And that's where things get fairly hot. In fact, you have what's called a film temperature in this region, which is obviously hotter than what we would call the bulk temperature. So if the bulk temperature out here is 250, in this region, the bulk region, the film temperature really close to that hot piece of metal might be 300 degrees, okay? So amine solvents, or amine, or both, are highly susceptible to breaking down if they get heated too high. If the temperature really goes much higher, probably a decent max temperature that you'd want to go on a film temperature for an amine solvent is in the range of 310 degrees F. So you can see that there's not a huge difference between the bulk and this max film. So if I think about this, if I have heat going into this piece of metal in a very intense manner, effectively just overheating this, guess what? This film temperature gets too high. If I do it gently, then this film temperature might be something closer to the bulk. Maybe it's 280, which everyone would be happy when I heat it gently. So you say, well, why don't you always heat it gently? Well, because metal costs money, and the more metal you have is you have to add more metal to actually heat it more gently. The less metal, the higher the intensity is, and the higher this film temperature is. So like most things in life, it gets down to economics. So if I really package everything really tight, low heat transfer surface, and just hit it with a lot of heat, a lot of intense heat, yeah, it's cheap, but then I have film temperature problems. If you have that, then you're breaking down that amine solvent. You got to go buy new solvent, and you may end up damaging the equipment in the process. So now you have maintenance, you have capital costs, and you've got to get new solvent. There's three major ways that our customers use to heat the amine or to reboil it. One way is a fire tube type. This is a fire tube heater, and like you might imagine, there's this tube, fairly good size diameter, let's say 18 inches, maybe 20 inches in diameter. that the fire goes into, and then of course after the fire, hot gases that are ultimately circulated in a U manner go through this it's submerged in a giant tank, go through, and then the flue gas comes out here. This whole thing, this whole fire tube, you can see this is my effort at making a water level or amine solvent level on top of this tube. And then you have a little bit that drips over a weir, and then heated amine comes out. In the process, typically you end up with some vaporized, and I would just call that steam. It's obviously not pure water, but it's steam coming off. So you have two streams coming out, effectively one stream going in. This is a fire tube type heater, and effectively this pool or this volume of fluid is pretty much stagnant. Now it's slowly moving this way. Obviously it comes in and it slowly moves, but it's not moving fast at all. So my heat transfer coefficient on the surface of this is pretty lousy. So if my heat transfer coefficient is lousy, what do you think it does to the film temperature? You got it. It raises the film temperature up, and maybe to a level that exceeds this recommended max. And again, this varies depending on what type of amine solvent you're using, but this would be the higher end. Some of the solvents that you might pick are even lower than 310. They may be 290 or 280. So you can, in a hurry with this type of technology, damage your amine solvent, maybe even damage this fire tube type heater. The second way that we've seen is a direct fired approach. Again, we're actually applying heat to metal, just like we did here, but it's the opposite side of the tube. Instead of fire in the tube, we've got amine solvent in the tube. We put fire or flue gas on the outside of the pipe and heat it that way. What this does is this allows you to more gently heat it. And the reason this allows you to more gently heat it is it's not stagnant. I have velocity going through this coil. I can have fairly high velocity, which gives me a good heat transfer coefficient and allows me to more gently heat this amine solvent. So this method is definitely better than this method. And you don't see a ton of these out there. You probably see more of these than you do these, mainly because in smaller sizes, these are pretty cheap. In really large sizes, these actually economically, this direct fired heater can be cheaper than the fire tube type. The third and last way of heating or reboiling is a use of hot oil. You use a heat medium. You have another heater over here that I haven't drawn, that's a hot oil heater, that's heating a hot oil going into a bundle of tubes inside, again, that are submerged in this amine solvent, and it heats the amine solvent this way. And maybe your first question is wait, aren't we back to very stagnant, very slow moving fluid? We are, but with hot oil, we can really control this. You know, you can actually send the hot oil, let's say at a maximum temperature, let's say 320 degrees if you wanted to, right? So you can really dial this in so that I'm not going to have a film temperature problem with this setup, even though I don't have a great heat transfer coefficient on the outside of this tube. I have this lever here that I can pull that keeps me from overheating the amine solvent ever. In fact, this is obviously the best way to do it, but it happens to be the most expensive way of doing it. One thing I didn't show on here, which is just crazy prospect, some people have actually tried to take Scotch marine boilers, you know, pieces of equipment that are used for boiling water, and use that same design. Well, if it can boil water, it can boil amine. Terrible idea. It's even worse than this, and we see those fail all the time. Don't ever try that. So this would be like okay, good, best. And okay is a little bit of a stretch. I would probably say this is not great, not a great idea. So whenever you're reboiling amine, think about that film temperature, because it'll make or break your heating process.